Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. You're in the great room. We're here for empowering engagement, trauma-informed care with a sensory twist. And our presenters today are one of the reasons why we're using the great room this year, because they tend to get a little loud. Or maybe not they do, but they encourage engagement. So joining us today from Overdose Lifeline, we have Rachel McFadden and Leah Edgereets, and we're so excited to have them here. They were with us last year. Today they're bringing a bit of a different twist on things, so we welcome them here, and we look forward to their session.
Thank you. We are excited to be here. I know you guys are probably situated, but I am going to make one last desperate plea. If you are all the way in the back, if you find it in your hearts to scooch up a little bit, we would love it. Okay. We are really excited to be here. We are super passionate about the work that we do. I think that'll come through when we're chatting today. And we just really hope that you guys, you have the clicker, yeah? Sorry, squirrel. That you guys find something tangible to take away and take back to the work that I assume you guys are also really passionate about. Thank you for those that are moving. We really appreciate it. Okay, so we're just gonna go over, I think these were probably in the session when you signed up. You probably saw them. That might be why you're here. But we're just gonna do a quick review of our objectives today. So we are gonna start, a little bit about, it said trauma-informed care. We're gonna kind of posture ourselves to how we view trauma-informed care within our program, talk a little bit about ACEs and trauma, but we're gonna really focus on how that trauma impacts our nervous system. And so we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into what we really mean when we're talking about the nervous system and our sensory system, right? We can probably name our 5 senses, but we're gonna dive a little bit deeper than that and draw some connections there. And then at the end, we will hopefully get to taking away some resources and tools and strategies about how we can adapt our approach to meet the needs of our kids' sensory and nervous systems to help build connection and engagement in our programs. So, just a little bit more about us and who we are. We like to put these pictures up because I feel like when I show up to presenting, the way I show up here, I'm still pretty casual, but this is a much more accurate representation of how I show up to work, which is really fun and exciting for me. So again, my name is Leah. I have a background educationally in social work, but I've been working with kids in the camp setting for most of that time as well, so for about 10 years. I realized on the way here, I was thinking about it, I just turned 30, and so I feel like I can actually say that now, I've been working with kids for a while and not be kind of fudging how long that has been. But anyway, so I feel like I'm really growing in my work. So, but yeah, so I love the camp space. I love what it does for the ability to build connection with kids amongst each other and with adults in a safe place, and really then drive development and engagement in that space. That's why I really like the job and the work that we do and all of the connection to the good other healthy youth development. And then I'm gonna let Rachel introduce herself.
My name's Rachel. I am an occupational therapist by trade and started working with Overdose Lifeline 3 years ago. I loved camp as a kid, so when the opportunity to work at an overnight camp presented itself, I was like, woohoo! So literally a dream job for me. I also want to say, I realized when we came up here that there's no presenter mode for this PowerPoint, so I'm just going to apologize ahead of time. Leah can wing it all day long. I usually like to look at my notes, so you might have to bear with me a little bit.
I believe in you. Okay, so I feel like we've mentioned a couple things, so we just wanted to kind of give some context to the work that we do and where we come from. So we work for an organization called Overdose Lifeline. We are based in Indianapolis, but we serve the whole state of Indiana in a couple of various capacities, as well as with our education across the states. But Overdose Lifeline is an organization, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, but it really came from a mom who experienced the death of her son to an opioid overdose. And although she was very familiar with recovery and recovery spaces, she realized, obviously, in that moment, there was a lot about the current moment of the opioid crisis and opioids in general that she didn't know. And so from that came a really grassroots effort to work on harm reduction, to get naloxone into into the hands of first responders, first and foremost, but then also into the hands of civilians, it is now more likely that we'll use naloxone, the life-saving drug to reverse an opioid overdose, than to use CPR. So that's where we are right now. So we just found out yesterday, we were talking at our staff meeting, we distributed 36,000 doses of naloxone in just the month of September. So it's a high need that we're still working on getting into, and we're also seeing like a little bit of a decrease in opioid deaths in Indiana. So the work that we're doing is making a little bit of a dent, of a little bit of an impact. So with all the harm reduction work, advocacy work that we do, we also do primary prevention education work, and we have lots of support programs, which is where we fall under in Erin's place. So our two programs, so this is our direct service youth programming that we do under Overdose Lifeline. And then so under Erin's Place, we have two youth programs. One called Camp Mariposa that serves youth 9 to 12 who have been impacted by a family member's substance use disorder. And then our Apex program serves kids 13 to 17 who have been impacted by their family member's substance use. So Camp Mariposa was our first and older program, so we'll focus a little bit more on that. You'll hear more about how we engage in that program, but we just wanted to let you know about Apex as well. It's growing, and we're excited to serve youth in that space as well. So Camp Mariposa, we do have a location in Indianapolis on the west side, and then also Camp Mariposa, Southern Indiana, which is based in, our campsite is in Mitchell, near Spring Mill State Park, if you're familiar. But we serve families come down from Bloomington. We have a couple families that come from like Evansville, Louisville, and then from the Bedford area. So that's really, we serve anyone that can make it to our campsite. We will serve them in the Southern Indiana region. Okay, so knowing that we serve kids who have been impacted by substance use, right, in their families, most of our kids, that looks like a primary caregiver at some point, a parent or a primary caregiver. So knowing that, we know our kids are coming to us with trauma. No matter what exactly their situation has looked like, that alone has caused an impact and has caused trauma in their lives. How many of you guys are already familiar with the ACE study? I figured, most of us, right? So we're already really familiar, so we're not gonna like talk about what that is. If you haven't heard of it, you could go home and Google it later. But what we're really focusing on is knowing that our kids are showing up with that level of trauma. Most of them are coming to us with an ACE score of 4 or more. And so really we have to think about how are our kids showing up? What kind of large impact has that had on them and their ability to engage in our program, right? So we're trying to make an impact on them. We're trying to connect with them through our mentors. But what does that look like, and how do we help them do that, knowing that they're coming to us with all of that trauma? So these are kind of the way that we posture ourselves within trauma-informed care. These are kind of the pillars that we really focus on, are felt safety, regulation, and connection. I really love the definitions on these slides too. So felt safety, right? Because kids, we know that they're safe when they show up with us, but if they don't feel safe, then it doesn't really matter that we know that they're physically safe. They have to feel it. They have to be psychologically safe as well. So how do we make sure that that happens as soon as they show up and engage in our program? Regulation, that's something that we'll really focus on today, right? So we're talking about the sensory system, the nervous system, and how they can regulate that to then also make healthy choices, right? They're gonna, even within our program and then very much outside of our program, they're gonna run into challenges in life. How do they regulate themselves to then make that next healthy choice? And then we do all of that, we think, through building connection with our kids. But using some of the strategies and tools that we'll talk about today help us build those connections. I think that, yeah. So, I wore my shirt today. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it says, stay curious. And that's just a mantra and like a posture that we really take within our program. It's something that we talk to our mentors a lot about, is just staying curious. And it really kind of wraps into the whole trauma-informed care of like, we don't have to know, our mentors definitely don't need to know every single thing that has happened to our kids, right? That's not what we're staying curious about, but we're staying curious about how that's impacted them in every way, what behaviors that they have, what are they trying to communicate to us? I'm sure some of you guys have probably heard that before, right? Behavior as communication, right? That's a big phrase that we learn. And so for us, that means staying curious about how their trauma is impacting their behavior today and how we can help them better engage. So that might sometimes look like challenging behaviors that are external, but they also might be internal, right? So it's like not engaging as much, isolating. Those kind of behaviors too are something that we're staying curious about, or staying curious about how they could better engage. Also staying curious about us. How are we showing up to each session? How are we showing up to work with our youth? And what ways has our backgrounds impacted our ability to engage and connect? So staying curious. So I'm sure some of you guys have also seen this image before, so we're not doing like the whole longer thing, but just again as like a reminder, right? That behavior that they have is just like the tip of the iceberg, and it's our job to kind of zoom out and think about what's underneath all of those things that we don't know, that we can't see. Even if there are things like that we might know about their history, we don't know exactly how that connects to the behavior, but we can really be curious and zoom out and try and think about in the bigger picture, how do those things relate to each other? So how can we help them work through that challenging behavior because we know all of these other things that are impacting them? Oh, yeah.
So I like to think about it as behind every behavior is a feeling, and behind every feeling is a need. So really just like being curious. They're telling you that they need something. What is it? On a scale from 1 to 10, if you guys would hold up your fingers and tell me how much you feel like you know about the physiological impact of trauma on brain development. Okay, great. Are there any neuroscientists in the room? Okay, good, because that's really intimidating when somebody's sitting in here. So we know that kids that, have ACEs have had a lot of things happen to them in life that can impact brain development. For some of them, it's being exposed to high levels of stress in utero, being exposed to substances in utero. Some of them are born prematurely before their nervous system's fully developed. Poor nutrition can be one, poor sleep habits, a lack of routine and predictability. All of those things impact the connections in the brain. But I'm going to talk specifically about this neuropathway. The thalamus is a part kind of like in your midbrain that helps you process and interpret environmental stimuli. So if I smell smoke, my brain's going to be like, thalamus, is that a threat or not? And my brain will then decide, oh my gosh, the house is on fire, panic, or I think that I forgot to take the cookies out of the oven. I can just take them out and move on with my day. So this is where I'm going to struggle a little bit without my notes. If the thalamus perceives no threat, it sends that information on to the cerebral cortex, which is the rational and logical part of your brain that allows you to slow down and figure out what happened. So that's where you are able to, interpret your environment and the context of things and what your body's telling you in a mindful way. From there, it'll go to your amygdala, which will help you interpret how you feel about what's happening, and the hippocampus, which will tell you what you're learning or what's worth remembering. So that cerebral context is a part of that equation to process that information. But if your thalamus perceives that input as a threat, it skips the cerebral cortex and goes straight to the amygdala. And that's when you go into fight, flight, or freeze. That's when the adrenaline kicks in and you're in survival mode. So you're no longer thinking rationally. And at that point, the hippocampus is not working to remember. So, sometimes if you go through something traumatic, you'll go back later and be like, wow, there's pieces of that missing. So that's what happens when it's perceived as a threat, and you can see the cerebral cortex is completely left out of that equation. So I hear loud noise, I'm sitting in my living room, and my heart might start racing a little bit. And if I don't have a lot of trauma or something triggering me, I might just remember, there was fireworks in the park today. And then my hippocampus can kick in and help my amygdala calm down. My heart slows down. I can go back to watching TV. No big deal. But if I perceive that as a threat, my amygdala is going to kick in instead, right? And I'm going to have a hard time calming down. Well, what we know about kids who experience a lot of trauma is that they stop trusting the world around them. Kids who don't have a secure attachment figure in their lives to tend to their needs just perceive everything in the world as a threat. So this neural pathway between the thalamus and the amygdala gets worn down over time, and they tend to perceive things as a threat that really aren't. And sometimes they aren't able to then actually know what is a threat because everything's a threat to them. This also causes the amygdala to, grow and become overreactive, and the hippocampus then starts to shrink and it doesn't work very well. So again, thinking about those memory gaps. And you can see here, the red in the brain on the right is the activated part of the brain. And on the left, that's a brain who's been impacted by trauma. You can see the difference in the prefrontal cortex, which is important for regulating our emotions. And so what you'll often see in these kids that have a background of trauma is difficulty regulating their emotions, difficulty with impulse control. And that's not because they're a bad kid. It's literally how their brain is wired because of their background. So if you think about it as like a hiking path, the path to the cerebral cortex, that logical part of the brain, sometimes you might hear it called the upstairs brain, is overgrown and hard to get to. But the path to the downstairs brain or the survival mode brain is very mowed down, easy to get to, and that kind of becomes the path of default for a lot of these kids. So you might see kids that in your brain are overreacting to something, or they're very dramatic. But again, it's really how their brain is wired. But neuroplasticity is a real thing, and so there is hope to repave that pathway if we really are willing to do the work and be intentional about it.
So I know that some of this is probably, again, a little bit of a review, but it's just a good way to begin and posture ourselves as we dig a little deeper. And so really thinking all the way back to our iceberg, right? So we see that challenging behavior. Does anyone have in their mind a challenging behavior that they, even though that they know might be connected to the impact that that child has, is still just so difficult to zoom out on and deal with? Just me? Okay. I was like, okay, man, dudes need to do some more work. I know for one, we have, a kid I was thinking about this morning, again, at our Southern Indiana camp, that the way that he shows up sometimes, right? He wants to be there, but he doesn't show it. And his way that he shows up, he has struggled making connections with his peers. He has struggled making connections with us. And because of that, sometimes he exhibits a very negative attitude towards our activities and being there. And for whatever reason, that is really a challenging behavior for me that really, as a person planning the activities and really excited about them, right? That's one that's, I have to work really hard to zoom out on. And sometimes I haven't been able to do that. And we get stuck in this cycle where I'm focusing on what he's saying and how he's showing up. And then he gets more frustrated because I'm just telling them that he needs to change his attitude or be this way or be that way. And then we're not able to make a connection in those moments. And so we get stuck in this cycle of assuming that he's just being disobedient just because he wants to be. But if we are able to change our posture a little bit and understand that he's on that survival path of going constantly to his downstairs brain, and if I can zoom out and take a little bit of a breath and a pause, and I, approach it with curiosity and compassion, right? That's a big one. Then we can then he feels a little bit safer even when we're addressing the challenging behavior, right? We're still gonna address it, we're not ignoring it, but the way that I show up to engage with him makes a big difference on how that interaction goes, right? And how safe that he feels. And then we can work to actually meet his needs and whatever that might be in those moments. So really just thinking about how we're showing up too, right? We focus a lot on what has happened to our kids and how they're doing and how they're showing up and what behaviors they're having, but it's also about how we show up in those moments too.
Okay, so dysregulation. everybody here works with kids. I want you to think of that kid in your mind who comes to you dysregulated. Think about them. So a lot of times we think about like the Bart Simpson or Dennis the Menace or Tigger kid who just can't sit still and they can't engage because they have all that extra energy and they just can't pay attention. But the other side of that is the Eeyore kid who maybe they don't on the outside need as much attention because they're not distracting other people, but they're also dysregulated and not going to get the most out of whatever programming you are trying to do with them if they're not in the right state of mind. So we're going to talk about the sensory system and how you guys can utilize strategies related to that sensory system to help empower engagement for some of these kiddos. So I want you to try and think of a smell that really like has an impact on you physiologically. Somebody please share. I can make Leah run around with the microphone. She has extra energy always.
And an extra shot of espresso this morning.
My grandma wore Red Door perfume, and like it's very specific kind of old lady smell, but also really wonderful. So like to me, that immediately is just happy.
Yeah, so like that nostalgic feel, and it probably gives you a sense of like safety or feeling loved.
Mine's a little weird, but where I grew up, they use swamp coolers as AC, and so they turn those on at the beginning of the school year, and they have a very specific smell. It's almost like a greenhouse, but every time that kind of smell hits me, it's the beginning of the school year. It's like 6th grade all over again.
That's so funny. That made me
Trauma
think
middle school.
of when I was growing up, my grandparents lived in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Anybody familiar with Lawrenceburg, Indiana? Okay. Do you know what I'm going to say? Seagram's plant. The minute we like hit town, you could smell the Seagram's plant, which most people find not to be that pleasant of a smell, but it just smelled like my grandma to me. Probably not as good as Red Door perfume.
All right, so mine's a little weird. So I grew up in a small, like, rural town in Kentucky, and we farmed tobacco. So in, like, October, when it's hanging in the barn, it's to dry, and you have the wood chips burning, like that smell. Like, if I could bottle it into a candle, that'd probably be my happy place.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are all good examples. Anybody coffee? Yeah, coffee's a good one. So smell can have a pretty big impact by making you feel safe or making you realize it's time for me to wake up, or maybe some of you like a lavender bath before bedtime or whatever. All right, so sight, there are definitely sights that impact the way that we feel. So if you're looking at this, how does it make you feel? Calm, relaxed. Now, if you have an irrational fear of sharks, looking at this might make you feel anxious. So, a good example of how everyone has different sensory preferences. How about this one? What if you see this in your rearview mirror? Immediate panic, heart's racing fast. And then your thalamus is trying to figure out, was I speeding? Is this a threat? Okay, what about sound? Does anybody have a sound that makes them feel a certain way? Maybe you use it intentionally to help you. Yeah. She's coming. Run, Leah.
Morning doves. Whenever I hear the sound of morning doves, it's like all over again, like taking a nap. No.
I don't think I even know what morning doves sound like. I do? Oh, okay. Good. Who did that impression? That was good. Any other sounds? Come on, you guys. The obvious one. There's somebody back there, Leah.
Mine is crickets, by the way.
African drumming is very relaxing and soothing for me.
African drumming, yeah. There's something, neurological there too, that repetition and rhythm.
I was going to say a train. When I used to go to my grandma's, there was a train close to her house. So when I hear trains, it makes me think of being at her house.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, I feel like Nobody ever says the obvious one. Oh, hold on, I am doing this wrong. So this might be, kind of like the mourning doves, the sounds of a forest. For some people, it might be the absence of sound that might impact them physiologically. You said train, and look, I had a train station right up here. But for some people, all the noise that you hear in a train station might actually be overstimulating. But nobody said music. Does anyone use music in the mornings to help them perk up, or at the end of the day to calm down? Okay, taste. What we can go back to coffee, obviously, but anybody have a taste that?
We keep talking about grandmas. One thing in particular, it reminds me of my grandma. My grandma loved butterscotch candy, and I don't like the hard candies. And every time that I randomly come across them, I always like that taste, that butterscotch. I think of my grandma.
Yeah. I put cookies up there, sometimes it's those cookies that make you feel warm and safe and go back to your childhood, or maybe it's your mom's lasagna, or maybe it's a Sour Patch Kid that you're eating to help wake you up. Okay, touch. Touch can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some people like a massage. Some people detest a massage. Some people like deep pressure. Some people don't. But, how many people feel that oxytocin release with a hug? Okay, actually not very many of you. Stay away from me. I'm a toucher. I'm a hugger. And honestly, God bless all the people that put up with me, because I definitely process the world around me with touch. But yeah, so it might be a hug, it might be a massage, it might be a high five or something like that. And then just kind of, hold on, go back. Thinking like when you saw the police sirens, you probably were also thinking about the sound of the sirens, because our senses aren't activated in a vacuum. We're generally experiencing more than one thing. You're not just looking at the beach, you're feeling the warmth of the sun, you're listening to the sound of the waves. But all of you guys, hopefully, were thinking of something that made you feel a certain way. So even for you, without even maybe processing it on a really intentional level, we use our sensory system to help regulate our arousal and our emotions. Okay, so we talked about the big five that everybody learns about in school. And this is my really dumb dad joke. Pity laugh, please. Thank you. So we're going to break touch down into light touch and deep pressure and talk a little bit more about those. And then we're going to talk about vestibular and proprioceptive input. So when we think about light touch, it's generally alerting. It's generally going to trigger your internal warning system. So think about walking through a spider web, or any of you women or men with long hair get that like ghost hair on the back of your arm, and it's so irritating. So that light touch can be pretty aggravating and alerting. Sometimes, I don't know if any of you guys played that game about like spiders crawling up your black blood dripping down, that light touch. If you know it's coming and you're expecting it, it can feel really good. But unexpected, it can really bother people. And then that deep pressure, the receptors for that are located deeper in the dermis, so it does actually trigger different feelings. For most people, deep pressure is a calming and organizing type of input. So that can look like the hug, or arm squeezes, or a weighted blanket, yeah. So deep pressure generally tends to be a calming and organizing. All right, vestibular is your body kind of making sense and responding to gravity around you. So we see here, like the girl on the balance beam, your vestibular system's hopefully gonna kick in if you're riding a mechanical bull. So it's your body trying to figure out where it is in space and how to maintain its positioning. Vestibular input it's a really wonky one, and it impacts people in a really different way. So generally, if it's like a lateral input, it's calming. So think about when you're holding a baby and you're trying to calm them down, you're just moving back and forth in one direction, right? A swing or a hammock, those also offer vestibular input in that lateral manner. If it's rotational or orbital, like the teacup ride or a merry-go-round, it can be very alerting, and for some people, it can be very distressing. So thinking about those things, if we're going to introduce vestibular input, is really important because you don't want kids throwing up on you. I don't recommend it. And then proprioceptive input is also related to body awareness. It often is confused with deep pressure, but the receptors for deep pressure are in the dermis, where the receptors for proprioception are in your joints. So it has a lot to do with coordination. So I picked this picture just because we work at a camp and we do s'mores a lot. It's probably not the best example, but so that kid is using proprioceptive awareness to, without looking, know where his body is in space and be able to bring that marshmallow up to his mouth and not stick it in his eye or smash it into his face. So you're really depending on your proprioceptive awareness if you go to pick up a cup, because you're going to handle it differently if it's an almost empty Solo cup versus a very full Yeti, right? The weight and the size is different, so you're controlling those pieces within your joints, that proprioceptive. And proprioceptive input is the greatest tool you can ever use. We call it hard work in the occupational therapy world, and it is both alerting and calming at the same time. So it can be used for most kids pretty universally. And you don't have to touch a kid to provide proprioceptive input. They can provide it for themselves. Hypersensitivity, hyposensitivity, just something to be aware of. You all have seen it. The kids who just can't handle the tag in the back of their shirt, that's me. I'm that kid. Leah knows when we get a new shirt, I will just complain all day. And then she's like, why don't you just cut it out? But that hypersensitivity, they can't handle the noise, they can't handle the touch. And the hyposensitivity usually looks like that kid that's running around with his ants in his pants, because nothing is going to slow him down. He's just not feeling it, he's not responding to it, it doesn't have the same impact. Okay, this is Leah. I don't even know what time it is.
Okay, if you are willing and able, I'm going to ask you to stand up, take a little movement break. It's a lot of information. And we're going to play, I have to be honest with you, I always do this part, and honestly, I don't know what it is. I'm not that good at it. You would think after all my years at camp, I don't know, we don't play Simon Says that often, so most of you guys will probably beat me. I think I'll be the loser in this game, but we're going to play it anyway, so I'm going to put the mic down to play. Simon says, stomp your feet. Simon says, put your hands on your head. Simon says, take a big stretch. Hands on your nose. See, I don't go fast enough. Okay, Simon says, stop stretching. Hands on your ears. Oh.
Ooh, she got some of you.
A little. Okay. Simon says, give yourself a big squeeze. Simon says, reach down and touch your toes. Stand up. Simon says, stand up. Simon says, touch your ears, touch your nose, touch your toes. No, okay. Simon says, take another big stretch. Simon says, do some jumping jacks.
I'm pretty sure the reason we're doing this on 2 floors this year is because we were the raucous ones last year.
Okay, Simon says touch your shoulders, touch your hips. Okay, Simon says, oh man, this is where I start to see, this is where I lose the plot a little. Simon says,
Turn around in a circle.
turn around in a circle. Simon says, touch your knees, touch your elbows. Simon says, touch your knees. Simon says, touch your elbows. Simon says, touch your head.
They're way better than you, Leah. I said they're way better than you. You're never going to win.
Okay, Simon says, stick your tongue out. Try and touch your nose.
Okay, I'm going to put an end to this and put you all out of your misery.
I hope you guys all got a good stretch in there. And that is the easiest one to do when we're all together in a conference room. Did anyone notice any little things that were included in the Simon Says game that might be related to what we were just talking about? You can answer.
Midline.
Yeah. Proprioception, right? Like knowing where our body is. Maybe that was also a little bit of a deep pressure hug to ourselves. The stomp, we didn't really talk about it yet, but stomping too, that's a good like heavy work, hard work that we talked about. Stretching, slowing down, all of those things. Just a real quick, silly example.
You invented a new word.
Really quick, silly example of how you can kind of include some of the things that we have talked about and will continue to talk about in things that don't look like we're going to stop and we're going to take this sensory break, right? We can include it in other things that we do, songs, games, movement breaks. Is it still me? Yes. Okay. This is something that we won't go too in depth about. And I, as a layperson, am going to explain it to you in the best way that I understand it, just to kind of maybe pique your curiosity if you want to go back and look up some more about it. And it's just kind of connect some of the dots again of like what we've been talking about into a little bit of a deeper sense. So there's this term called interoception, and it is kind of the connection between what we're feeling in our body and actions that we want to take care of ourselves. So an example might be, right, like if our stomach is growling and we can feel that it's empty, right, that is a sensation. It's telling our brain to take an action. What do? We get a snack. If we have goosebumps and we're shivering and we know that we're cold, we might put a sweater on. And that happens with other kinds of things in our life too. I think another one that people are starting to become more familiar with, right, is the physical sensation of anxiety, right? It might be for you, like when we talked about some of those alerting sounds and sights earlier, it might be a heartbeat. For me, it's like loss of appetite, right? If I'm not eating, then I might start to be curious about why and say, it isn't because I'm having stomach problems, I'm not experiencing an illness, it's actually because I'm experiencing stress. And what can I do about that? Instead of just treating like, no, I'm not gonna take medicine for my stomach, that's not gonna do anything for my stress. So really connecting those bodily sensations to emotions, feelings that we're having, right? So the girl on the screen talking about, she might be experiencing physical symptoms, and she might say, oh, I worked out yesterday, or it might be that I'm experiencing a lot of grief in my life right now, and it's actually causing me bodily sensation. So what can I do about that emotion that I'm feeling to really take care of myself? So helping kids kind of draw those connections too and start to learn what that's really about. And I think probably most of us who have worked with youth have experienced that in some capacity, right? Like they come to us a lot of times with those because they haven't learned how to make all of those connections yet. They're talking about the physical symptoms. They're sick, they're tired. But what might really be going on? Sometimes they might be sick, they might be tired, but they might also be experiencing a lot of stress in the environment that we have them in. They might be experiencing grief from at home, or other kinds of sensations and emotions. So it's just an example of one of our kiddos and kind of what we've noticed on his sort of personal, everyone's different, right? So kind of what we've observed in some of his ability and where he falls at in his interoception scales. So knowing that he is kind of that kid with the ants in his pants, like that's how he presents himself, and sometimes he doesn't realize the kind of space that he takes up. His receptors and awareness of his body are a little bit lower, so he might come up and give you a big hug or a big squeeze or a big pat on the back that feels really aggressive, but to him it's just because he isn't sensing that in the same way. Or like body temperature is an easy one too, right? Like I don't know what temperature it was on that day, but it probably wasn't summertime. But he was still going to go out in shorts and a t-shirt because he doesn't sense that temperature in the same way. Do you want to say anything about that him? No. So, okay, so going back, so we've talked a lot about the sensory system, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, but we just wanted to to resituate again, that we're talking about felt safety, regulation, and connection. So how we use all of this sensory information and strategies to connect. Really what we're thinking about is our trauma-informed care and our trauma system. So these are examples really from our program, right, in the ways that we connect the dots, but hopefully they will like connect with something that you do in your work. So for felt safety, right, like we talked about, not just being physically safe, we know that they're safe, but how do we help them feel that safety? So some of the things that we do, like for visuals, right, we try and do, if we know that kids are struggling, we'll put visual schedules. We'll have them maybe in the cabins or posted in our lodge so they can really see what's coming up next, where they're headed, and that kind of reduces some of that anxiety about not knowing where they are, a new environment, or where they're going. Even for, and then like visual timers are a thing I think people have started to use too. That can be really helpful depending on the situation. Like in the cabins, we'll use them for how much longer you have before it's bedtime, right? Like how much longer do you have to do this activity? And clear signage, even for our parents too, right? To help them ease the stress as they enter a new environment. Like here's where you're going, here's where you're gonna check in, here's where our people are gonna be, being easily identifiable in our bright colored t-shirts and matching shirts. Other important things. We do also use, microphones, and we'll carry around like a little speaker with us at camp so that we're not always shouting and yelling and kind of giving that alerting system to our kids. Sometimes we are, right? It's camp. We're gonna have fun sometimes, and then they're gonna learn to move through that. But if we don't have to be yelling over the loud dining hall room, and we can use a microphone instead to kind of keep our voice at what is a normal conversational level, things like that can be really helpful to not alert their sensory system. But within that, right, we are doing songs, but they're familiar, so we repeat the same ones, right? We might repeat the same games. We use songs as a way, right? We were talking about sounds earlier, and we brought up music, and like music that we know can help us. So when we sing the same songs throughout the weekend, we might have a familiar chant that we use that gets their attention. Those kind of things that they become familiar to them then are helpful in that felt safety. We talked about touch a lot today and the way that that can be helpful. So obviously consensual touch, but being intentional about including those things builds connection, right? So like offering them a high five, a hug if they are the kind of kid that wants that and accepts that. Hair brushing is a big one too. We do a lot of hair braiding at camp at night. That's a great touch point. We provide them blankets that they can use that are like little soft, cozy blankets. And then building on those, but then really on that bottom section too. So long-term commitments from our mentors. So that's a big piece for us, right? And I'm sure in your work you talk about staff turnover and stability, because we're really focused on the connections that they have with the adults in their lives, and building that consistency is a big part of what helps them feel safe, right? Having that connection with an adult. And just establish culture of our curiosity and compassion so that when they know that when they're showing up, that we've trained and asked our adults in their lives to stay curious and stay compassionate towards them, so that when they do have a challenging behavior, it's not going to be met with maybe the same kind of, willful disobedience kind of posturing that they may have experienced in other spaces. And again, familiar games, chants, and adults that feel safe really all build into like, you can see how they also connect to those sensory things, but also back to building connection and that felt safety. So then we're gonna skip regulation because we're gonna go into that a little bit deeper and provide lots and lots of fun tools. And at the end, there will also be a QR code that you can scan that'll have links to some of the things that we talk about, especially in the regulation section. But connection, right? So being intentional about it's creating opportunities for those in your care to share understanding, experience, and spaces. So I really like the way that it says that because it's creating those opportunities. Sometimes kids aren't good at making eye contact, right? But that is a big way that you build connection with people. So we've done things in our games and our interactions where we build that in. We have a game that we sometimes do decide who goes to dinner first, and it's called a moo-off. And they have to stand there, and they have to look at each other in the eye, and they have to try and not smile. And they can moo and try and get the other person to smile, right? Silly things that you wouldn't really think about, but those are really actually intentionally helping them build connection with their peers and learn how to make eye contact with people. And lots of other games and things that are similar to that. but also sharing understanding. So sharing in our spaces. So we always do an activity called Letter to Addiction with our kiddos. They have the opportunity to write in whatever way makes sense to them. And then we have lots of graded ways that they can share that back to their peers. They can read it. They can have a friend come up with them and help them. They can have a mentor read it. They can have one of us, and then they get to throw it in the fire. But allowing them to share that experience really builds connection. And then bedtime rituals too. There are lots of sharing things that we do at that. We have the wonderful opportunity. One of the reasons I love camp is we actually get to share physical space, right? They are sleeping in the cabins. They are sleeping next to other people and sharing that space. And then again, going back to touch, lots of consensual touch, hair braiding. We do martial arts and sports at camp. Also just playful interactions, right? So sometimes like, I don't know, if we're really focusing on all this intentional, like hard work that we're doing. But obviously when we're with kids, part of it is just having fun, allowing them the space to have fun, but also as adults, showing up and being a little silly and getting on their level, right? We know these things, but those playful interactions is how kids experience the world. It's how they learn. So building connection in that way. And then, yeah, sharing meals. I think we all know probably that that's a big one too, right? So actually getting to sit down and build that in and sharing meals and having games that we play during those meal times allows for more sharing, more connection. And we do some intentional arts and crafts activities too that really allow them to like stop and think about and be intentional about it. So it's not just a craft, it is fun. We've done really fun things like it says leather stamping was one of my favorites. Like we are really taking those little pieces and we're stamping it into the leather, and they're getting to take that away with them. But all throughout that activity, we're talking about intention words and building intention, and we're sharing that back about why we chose that word and what it means to us. And then they get to walk away with something that's really cool. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say about that.
I'm going to add to that, if that's okay. I think another cool thing about camp is the lack of technology really helps with connection. And some of the kids, like the worst part of coming to camp for them is that I can't play Fortnite all weekend. And we're like, you'll survive, trust me. And usually it just takes one weekend for them to realize they can do it. But that lack of like having their face in their phone or their tablet or, you know, looking at the TV really helps them build connection. And in a world that includes so much technology, a lot of kids don't get the chance to do that or aren't forced to do that. The other thing about connection, and one of the tenets of trauma-informed care is peer support. And a lot of our mentors do have lived experience of having a loved one with substance use disorder. But even aside from that, these kids being able to build connection with other kids who've really been through what they're going through, who can understand what they're talking about in a place where they can talk about it. Because most of these kids aren't going to go to school and talk about the time that they found, you know, their parent overdosed on the bathroom floor, because they love that parent. They don't want that parent to get in trouble. They don't want that parent to be judged, or talking about a parent who's currently incarcerated. But they have the opportunity in this community to build connection with people that can really relate to those things. Okay, so we're going to talk more about the sensory regulation stuff, but this slide is here to remind me to tell you that every strategy we talk about is not going to work for every kid. So please remember to choose wisely and pay attention. Yeah, and I also remembered I was supposed to talk about something on the Tigger and Eeyore slide that I forgot, which is common language. So when we talk about dysregulation, there's lots of programs out there that will give you a vocabulary to talk about it with kids. The Alert program talks about your engine. How's your engine running? There's a program that talks about the zones of regulation. Am I red? Am I green? Am I yellow? I don't personally have a preference on those, but I do think that it's important that you choose a language and use it with your kiddos, whatever it may be, that you share that common language, because that's going to empower them to start to be able to communicate what they need and how they're feeling. So establishing that language is going to be a really important part of them being able to self-regulate. Okay, so we're starting with vision. Okay. All right, some of the obvious ones are light, right? Like if the lights were dimmer in here and the shades were all down, you guys might be drooping a little bit more. So obviously we can use light to help kids regulate and increase their alertness or decrease their extra energy. Visual timers, Leah talked about, are a really good way for kids to be able to look at the time going away if you're making them do something that they don't enjoy doing. And some of it's just relaxing. So a lava lamp's good. There's got to be a couple people in this room old enough to remember when lava lamps were all the rage. I personally like jellyfish. Sometimes I'll pull up a jellyfish video on YouTube, and just kind of watching that jellyfish can help a kid to calm down. We make glitter jars at camp. Those are really fun. We should do that again. Watching movement can be alerting. Sometimes it can be too stimulating in an environment where there's a lot going on and a lot of people moving, and we need to watch out for that with kids, and give them a break from that if they need it. And then thinking about colors, and there's a lot of science behind the physiological impact of colors. You know, like the hospital that I work in did a lot of research into what color they were going to paint the walls in the patient rooms to help them relax. So they're these like nice, cool blues and greens. But the employee bathrooms are bright orange. Now, I think they were telling us to crap and get off the pot. So thinking about what color is the space that you're in, or has anybody ever gone into like a really small meeting room where the wall's just white and it feels like it's blinding you? So you can think about that a little bit and choose some strategies to help find your kid the right place to be in. Okay, smell. We talked a lot about smell in here, right? Anybody do like essential oils? There's so many cool ways to do essential oils nowadays. In the bottom left, they're like slap bracelets with a little felt pad that you can put the oils on and then put it in there. So, you can have the kids, pick one that makes them feel alert before they have to sit down and do their homework, or something that's more calming before they go to bed. Vanilla, sandalwood's a really calming one, sweetgrass. Who did the colored markers when they were a kid? The scented ones where they were fruity. Oh, that was the best. So thinking about, things like that, and those citrusy smells tend to be pretty alerting. So if you're being intentional, you can do that. The other thing about senses, a lot of you guys said it brought you a sense of comfort, even if it was the smell of like tobacco drying in a barn or old lady perfume. So having a consistent scent can bring a sense of familiarity and a sense of comfort when you're working with kids. Okay, this is where I don't have my notes, and so I feel like I might be forgetting something, but... Okay, the mouth. We're not really just doing taste here, but the mouth in general. Anybody here love like a good chewy snack like Twizzlers or beef jerky? Yeah, so that's all proprioceptive input or heavy work through your jaw, which we talked about earlier is like the magic input. So for a lot of people, that is calming and regulating, as long as you don't have any teeth problems. That's one strategy that you can use. A lot of kids, you'll notice, they just have this like oral fixation and they need that oral input. You can get in the bottom right, those little chewies. You can get something like that on Amazon. You can also pay a lot of money to buy them on like Fun and Function website, which I love, but there are cheaper options. Another good option if you have a kid that likes to chew is to go to the aquarium store and buy aquarium tubing and cut it into smaller strips. You can also thread a necklace through it because it's cheaper. And these kids, we had a kid bite a bunk bed and bite a chunk out of a bunk bed one time because he was so orally, yeah. But thinking about that, though, all those sour candies that the kids love, those are very alerting. So if you have a kid that's like very low level, having a hard time staying awake, having a hard time focusing, give them some pucker up lemonade, give them a warhead. Sucking is also a good oral input that's calming if we think about going all the way back to infancy, babies calm themselves by sucking on their thumb or your finger or a pacifier. So giving them a nice thick milkshake and having them suck it through a straw, or a thick smoothie if you're trying to go a little bit healthier, that can be really good. Another one from the mouth is humming. So I don't know if anybody finds themselves like humming when you're like driving for a long time and trying to stay awake, but that vibration actually can be calming. And one of the like attention getters we do at camp is that we'll just call out flat tire. So she is now creating those vibrations in her mouth, and then she's also providing input to the top of her head too. So that's like a double whammy. Another one we do is Red Robin. Yeah, okay, come on, that was kind of pathetic. Red Robin. Yeah. So just little things like that just might seem silly and dumb, but actually are providing a little bit of sensory input. Oh, high chews. Does anybody like high chews? Yeah, lots of good chewy. A dum-dum, some gum, blowing bubbles. Okay, listening. I feel like this one is... Most people use this well on their own, but thinking about what sound is good for you. Some people study better with music in the background. Some people study better in the silence. Same thing goes for sleep. Some people who grew up in a city, they need noise. They cannot sleep in the silence. And other people, that really grates on them. But paying attention to how the kiddos you're working with are impacted by the sounds around them, and then trying out different things is really important. We talk about those nostalgic sensations, and music is really one of those. Like, you could probably right now tell me one of the number one songs when you were in high school, right? Like if I hear Bryan Adams' Everything I Do, I'm like straight back to high school. So creating those memories, starting with them. We sing Stand By Me at camp a lot, and I am very confident that if any of our campers hears that song outside of camp, they're thinking about camp, which is a safe space for them. So it is, we're tethering those positive memories to the forefront of their mind and allowing them to connect back to those by introducing music. But you also, of course, for music, you want to be aware of like volume and tempo and lyrics and making sure that they're appropriate and that there's nothing triggering in there. The human voice also is very calming. We have one camper, they like to negotiate about what they're going to listen to while they fall asleep. Is it going to be rain sounds, or is it going to be a story, or is it going to be the ocean? But we have one kiddo who really, really likes the human voice. And so the rain doesn't do it for her. Nothing does it for her like a good little sleep story. So because she just likes to know that there's someone nearby that is part of her felt safety. Can you think of anything else for sound? Okay. Okay, touch. I meant to ask you guys, raise your hand if you guys work with kids one-on-one. Okay, what about in groups? Okay, I see a lot of you raising your hand twice. Okay, perfect. Okay. So like that Peapod thing over there, you probably, I don't know, maybe you do have the budget to buy one for every kid you work with, but that's probably more of a one-on-one intervention that you could use. Compressive clothing is also really good and honestly works so good for some of our kiddos. And that can just be going to Walmart and buying the generic, how the compressive clothes are like so trendy right now, the generic Under Armour. I see you, 10 minutes. Okay. So compressive clothing's good. Again, you can go on the Fun and Function website and buy it really, really expensive, but you can also get it at Walmart or on Amazon. And just try it with the kids, see if it works. Also, for touch, obviously, high fives. That little sloth guy is a little warmy. Have you guys seen those before? They're like little weighted stuffed animals, but you can also put them in the microwave, so it's like warm and heavy and soft, all the good things. And those are, I find, very calming. I bought them for my 20-year-olds for Christmas one year. Hugs are deep touch. Sensory strips, the little stickers, you guys know what sensory strips are? Okay, yeah, they're just little stickers. They're great because they can be discreet if a kid's feeling self-conscious about the fact that they need something to help them regulate, so it can go under the desk where they can just hold on to it and rub it. I have one on my computer. I have them a lot of different places, but they're bumpy, there's different textures, and it's just something that they can do and rub with their finger or their hand to provide a little bit of input to help them be able to focus. And then fidgets, obviously. They were so nice to have a box of fidgets sitting out for us. I will say, be very selective when you're choosing your fidgets. They are not all created equal because some of them are loud. Like one of my favorite fidgets is this little slug guy, but he makes all kinds of clickety-clacky noises. And we always tell our kids fidgets are tools, not toys. So they're meant to help you focus. And if they start distracting other people, that means it's not the right tool for you and they need to pick another tool. Okay, vestibular input. There's a picture of Leah on the zip line at camp. So much fun. So we talked about this one a little bit before when I brought up vestibular, but thinking about rocking a baby, how calming that back and forth motion is. So swinging is good. Not typically when it is like a cylindrical swing, although some kids love that, and that's because we all have unique sensory systems. We do scream races a lot at camp. Do you guys know? Have you ever done that? Yeah, that's so fun. You'd basically just you can only run as far as you can scream. So it's not who's the fastest, it's who has the best lung capacity. And let me tell you, I am not a fast runner, but I do great in a scream race. It's all about the modulation. You can't go too fast. So rolling down a hill is another way for vestibular input. So generally is going to be more alerting. Hammocks are great because they hug you and you can rock. So you're getting a little 1-2 punch there. I wish I had my notes. Am I missing anything? Okay, thanks. She's so good at validating me. Okay, so this is the heavy work one. So this can be as simple as giving a kid something to do because they need that deep pressure input. So can you please stack these chairs over there? Can you please carry this big heavy box to the cabin? Giving them a backpack full of something heavy and then them getting that pressure here on their shoulders. Weighted vests, are great. And they really are great, but some kids feel kind of singled out for those. And so if you can find a way to give it without drawing too much attention, if you're really paying attention and they feel safe with you and you can just walk up behind them and put your hands on their shoulders and push down, that's a good way to provide the input. Trampolines or any kind of jumping are good. Anything squeezy. Swimming's great proprioceptive input. All that pressure against your joints as you're moving through the water and having to push through. Any kind of pushing and pulling. Sometimes if there's a really squirrely kid, I might say, I'm absolutely so tired. You're going to have to push me back to the dining hall. Leah, push me back to the dining hall. And I provide resistance like this, and they're getting the heavy work, and it doesn't feel bad for me either. Thank you. But just finding creative ways to give them that input and make it seem fun and kind of disguise it as something else is good. Body socks are good. Again, that's one of those things. Don't get tricked into paying too much money for one. You can buy them on Amazon. How much are the ones we buy? Like $8? Yeah, and it's just like stretchy, spandexy material, and they sit there, 10 minutes, and they can push through it and get all that input through their joints. It really is kind of magical. Another thing, Silas, the picture she had of the kid up earlier, one day I just told him to sit in a tote. I wasn't really being mean at all. Like a big Rubbermaid tote. And he sat in that tote and that space where he was like pushing against it. He absolutely loved it. We started bringing it to every camp. But we're like, where's Silas's box? He just loves to sit in that and be contained and have that input. He's always that kid that's like crawling underneath something or hiding in the bushes because he likes those small spaces. So giving him a space where we know where he is and we know that he's safe and he's not disappearing and he can push against is really good. Bubblegum, we talked about mouth, but that also is that like proprioceptive input through the jaw. Okay, so when in infancy, we talk a lot about co-regulation and how we can impact the infant's regulation through our own. And we all know too, like if you're a mom and you're stressed, then the baby feels that stressed and the baby's stressed, right? So this does continue up through the toddler years and adolescence and even adulthood. So thinking about we have to be in a good space in order to facilitate the kids we're working with being in a good space. And that means us modeling for them the things that we want them to do. To do that, we have to be in close physical proximity. We have to be attuned to what they're going through. And we have to be paying attention. It's also very helpful, again, talking about that common language to process out loud what we're doing. So if I feel frustrated because no kid is listening to me, I will say out loud, you know what, you guys? I'm feeling pretty frustrated. I don't feel like you guys are listening. And I don't want to lose control, so I'm going to take some deep breaths, and I'm going to step away, and I'm going to take a break. And that's okay, because we're all human. But being able to vocalize out loud what we're doing to regulate can help us set an example for them. And then, obviously, make sure you're paying attention and hitting your target. So if the kid just rolled down the hill, and now all of a sudden they're a little dysregulated because that's alerting and sometimes can be a little bit overstimulating. Maybe have them walk back up the hill doing a bear walk so they're getting heavy work and they're pushing through their joints to calm them back down. But always paying attention and remembering every kid's different and is what we're doing working? Are we hitting our target?
Okay, so really quick, we just wanted to give some like real world examples of how we've used some of these regulation strategies at camp and with the kids that we work with. This is Silas. You can see his toe up there. I think honestly, and I think too, it started because he started crawling into cardboard boxes too, but you know, they couldn't sustain his weight. So then we were like, maybe a tote will work. And then on the bottom picture too, I think is really interesting. That is a sweatshirt that he has himself wrapped up in like that. He has his legs through the sleeves. And that was a really interesting one, right? Because that was a behavior that he did for himself. He knew that he needed that, but it was becoming distracting, right? Like we've got a kid sticking his legs through the sleeves of his sweatshirt and like running around. Now other kids want to do it. He can't walk, right? He can't engage in the activity that we're engaging in. But that was a clear sign to us he needs something, right? And so that's when we started buying more body socks at camp. You know, we have rules around them. We set expectations. These stay in the cabins. They don't go outside, or maybe they're in the dining hall if we need them during activities. And now we've been using them long enough that he asks for them. So he knows that we have them. He asks for them when he needs it. Same kid we have. He requires a lot of oral sensation. Is that the right word? Yeah, sure. Whatever. And so we have chew necklaces for him. One time I forgot them. We grabbed Tide shoes on the way. Again, setting expectations. I have these in my backpack. If you need them, let me know. And there were a couple times where he did ask for them. At first, it was like redirecting him. Hey, you're doing a behavior that we don't really want you to be doing. Can you come and join the group? He comes and sat down and said, can I have a high chew, right? And so we're learning how he's also learning to like ask for those things that we need and building, again, that felt safety and connection and regulation with him. Another camper. So you can see she has her weighted vest on because she doesn't bother her to like be seen wearing it. She's also learned to ask for that. She was also really interesting too at our last camp. She came and was kind of explaining to me too, and it was a different situation. Like I hadn't heard it from her before, but she was starting to explain like to me that she did feel that connection. She was like, I don't feel well every time I come to camp. And you know, it was kind of hyperbolic language. She's like, every time I come to camp, I get really stressed out and I don't feel good. But she was still there. She had made the choice to come. She had even chose to come to camp over her volleyball tournament. She had made a whole pros and cons list. So we're still curious. I don't know exactly what that situation was for her, what she was experiencing, but she was starting to learn that connection and express that to us too. So we'll continue to think about that. And she loves those squeeze toys. Yes, okay, so I put this up there. So those are some examples of ways we've used all of those tools like with our kids. We gave lots of other examples. I know that if I was you guys and I was sitting there, especially if I'm working with kids in a group, I'd be like, how in the world am I going to introduce a body sock for like the one kid that needs it when I've got 10 other kids and I don't have 20 body socks, and what, are we all just gonna be in body socks? So, it is hard, it is challenging sometimes. The one thing that we did at camp, has anyone ever seen that teacher example of using the Band-Aid to explain fairness to her classroom? Yeah? Some of us. So we utilized that at camp. We did it in our own way. Basically, we did a skit where there was we had the camp nurse up on stage, and we had some mentors run in, and the first one was like, oh my God, I just bumped my head. I need a Band-Aid. I need a Band-Aid. So she goes, okay, and she puts a Band-Aid on her forehead. And then the next mentor comes in and is like, oh my gosh, I don't know what the next one, sprained an ankle. And they're like, oh, I can't walk. I'm spraining my ankle. And she goes, okay, and she puts a Band-Aid on their forehead. And then all the kids are like, what are we doing here? And then the next one, we're really dramatic, right? A mentor comes in with an arm down their sleeve, and they're like, I just got attacked in the lake, and I lost an arm. And they're like, oh boy, better put a Band-Aid right on your forehead. And then we're really starting to see what is going on? That person needs more than a Band-Aid, right? And so then we kind of had a reflection conversation with them about some times we need different things, right? A Band-Aid, while that is what worked for the first person, being fair doesn't always look like doing the same thing for every person. And we said, okay, so now sometimes if you hear us say the word just Band-Aid, that's going to be a reminder that sometimes we need different things. And it really did work. When Silas sat down, and especially, right, because we're using sometimes it's like candy. Oh my God, I want a piece of candy, right? It's a high chew. So he asked for one, I give it to him, and other kids oh, can I have one? And I just said, Band-Aid. And he said, okay. And it really worked. It might not work every time, but it was just something that we're introducing to help give, again, that common language so that we can communicate with our kids. Sometimes we need different things, and that's okay. And sometimes we're going to give things to kids, and we're still learning about each of their needs. But as we are on that journey, we can help some of our other kids understand that that is what fair looks like.
Some of our kids Band-Aid themselves, too. They're like, can I? Never mind, Band-Aid.
I think that is that the end?
I think.
Okay. Will you click to the next slide, though?
Oh, no, mentor model.
Okay.
There you go.
So this is our QR code. There's some links to things like helping you make visual schedules if that's something you want to do, links to some of the tangible sensory regulation strategies that we talked about, and just some other cool fun stuff. Oh, there's a lot of books on there. There's a book, I think one of the ones is My Body Listens, that kind of introduces kids to the concept of interoception. Some other yoga books that are really good that we like to use. So just some fun and helpful tools. I think we have probably 1 minute now to 1.5. So if anyone has any questions, we can do that. But thank you guys for being here. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about how we can refer kids to your camp?
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking that. Yes, so again, kids 9 to 12 for Camp Mariposa, Southern Indiana. We're located in Mitchell. You can find us on our website if you were to Google Overdose Lifeline or Aaron's Place with 2 A's, Aaron's Place. You will find us. You can reach out. We also have business cards up here if you would like to come and grab one. You can always reach out to me directly. I don't think it's something that we talked about because we weren't really going in depth on the program, but we do keep it pretty small. We have plenty of room to grow in both of our programs, but just so that you guys know a little bit more about it too. Either of our camps, we wouldn't do more than 30 kids in a weekend, and our mentor to camper ratio is usually, honestly, probably about 1.5 to 1, depending on the weekend and how many kids show up. So we keep a really low ratio. But just that, I say that to say too that we have the good amount of capacity to really work with our families, to work with you, to refer a family. If you're not sure but you have questions, please reach out and we can talk about what that would look like. And then there's an application online if you want to give that to families directly. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. So they can come, we hope that they would come to as many of them as possible. So we meet 6 times at 6 overnight weekends throughout the year in each cycle. And they can come from 9 until 12. So we actually have a camp next weekend. It'll be our last one of 2024 in Indianapolis. And so we're graduating about 8 kids, I think, from the program. So they're all like 12 or 13 now. But all of them have been in the program at least 2 years, if not 3 or 4 years. So that's been really cool to see their growth throughout the years. No cost to families. And they also get like almost everything they would need when they show up to camp. They get a backpack, a sleeping bag, a water bottle, toiletries. We always have extras. I usually have extra pillows. I'd love for them to bring their own, but I have them if they need them. So hopefully if they bring up like just the clothes they need for the weather, then we should be good to go.
You can also reach out if you're interested in mentoring.
Yes.
All right. I want to say thank you to Rachel and Leah. They've helped us think about the power of the nervous system and using that power to tap into the possibilities that kids have. This is our end of our session. If you have evaluation forms that you have filled out, we've got a planning team member, Ruth, in an orange lanyard in the back. You can pass those to her. If you're not finished with them yet, you can finish those. If you're doing CEUs, you can also give those to Ruth if you like on your way out, or you can drop them off at a table downstairs. We have a 15-minute break until our next session. So we have another session coming in here at 11, and then we have the same locations, Duke West, and 2 rooms downstairs. So I hope you enjoy your next time.